I never meant to find out. It started one evening when Mom asked me to print something from Dad's email because the printer in her room was broken. She was in the kitchen, making dinner, humming the same song she always did when she tried to pretend everything was fine. I opened Dad's laptop and typed his password, the same one he'd used for years. But when the inbox loaded, the first subject line stopped me cold. Last night was worth the risk, Red Heart. My hands froze on the keyboard. For a few seconds, I just stared at it. I told myself it had to be spam. But then I saw the name, Clara M., and a preview line that said, "You taste like trouble." I wish I could say I closed the laptop right then. I wish I could say I respected their privacy. But something inside me cracked, a small sound that no one heard but me. I clicked. There were hundreds of emails, photos, hotel receipts, texts copied and pasted because she wanted to keep them safe. Some of the messages were months old. Some were from last week. I remember reading the words, "She'll never know," over and over until they blurred together. That night, I couldn't eat. I sat at the dinner table watching my dad laugh at something Mom said, pretending to be the man he used to be. His phone buzzed once. He glanced at it and smiled. That same smile I'd just seen in a photo he sent to someone else. I wanted to scream, but I didn't, because Mom looked tired, because I'd never seen her look more fragile, and I knew that if I said a single word, everything would break. So I stayed quiet. For 2 weeks, I carried that secret like a bomb in my chest. Every morning, Dad left for meetings. Every night, he came home smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't Mom's. I started noticing how often he avoided eye contact, how quickly he'd change the subject when Mom mentioned the future. It was like watching a play where everyone knew their lines, except me. Then one night, I couldn't hold it anymore. Mom was folding laundry in the living room, the TV murmuring in the background. I sat down next to her, heart pounding so loud I thought she could hear it. "Mom," I said, "can I tell you something weird I found?" She didn't look up. "What kind of weird?" "The kind that hurts," I whispered. She froze mid-fold, the sound of fabric slipping through her fingers. "What did you find?" she asked quietly. I told her everything. The emails, the photos, the woman's name. I expected her to cry or shout. She didn't. She just stood there, perfectly still, and took one deep breath. Then she said, almost too calm, "Show me." That night, I watched her scroll through the messages one by one. Her face didn't change. No tears, no shaking, just this terrifying calm. When she reached the last message, she closed the laptop gently and whispered, "Thank you for telling me. Don't mention this to your father yet." Then she went to bed. I lay awake, waiting to hear something, a fight, a door slam, anything. But the house stayed quiet, too quiet. In the morning, she acted normal. She made coffee, packed Dad's lunch, kissed him on the cheek. I thought maybe she was in denial. But when I looked closer, I noticed her eyes, cold, focused. She wasn't broken. She was planning. A week later, I realized how far she'd gone. She started gathering papers, tax forms, bank statements, copies of the mortgage. She said she was just organizing things. But I knew better. She also began talking to people on the phone in another room. Once I heard her say, "Yes, I'd like to schedule a consultation." Dad didn't notice. He was too busy with Clara, too sure that his secret was safe. Then one evening, he left his phone on the counter while taking out the trash. Mom picked it up calmly, like she'd been waiting for that exact moment. She scrolled for 10 seconds, then set it back down and continued cooking. That's when I realized she wasn't going to confront him. She was going to destroy him. The first sign came a few days later. Dad's boss called during dinner, asking why he'd missed a meeting that afternoon. Mom smiled and said, "Oh, I'm sure he had something important come up." Her tone was sweet, too sweet. After the call, she didn't say a word. The next morning, I overheard her talking to someone at the local community center, asking about event rentals and microphone setups. I didn't understand why. Not until she looked me dead in the eyes and said, "You're not to say a word about any of this." "Not yet. Do you understand?" I nodded, terrified of her calmness. Then came the wedding invitation. My sister's wedding, 3 weeks away. Dad was supposed to give a toast. Mom offered to help organize the reception. Nobody thought much of it, but I saw the way she smiled when she said it. Every day after that, she was busy, making calls, checking guest lists, whispering to vendors. Dad assumed she was just being her usual perfectionist self. But she wasn't planning a wedding. She was planning a reckoning. The night before the ceremony, I found her sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a piece of paper. It was a printed photo, Dad and Clara, holding hands in front of a hotel. On the back, she'd written the date and the words "the truth always shows." I asked her what she was going to do. She just smiled and said, "I'm going to make sure everyone sees him the way I do now." I didn't sleep that night, not because I was afraid of what she'd do, but because I finally understood that she wasn't acting out of anger. She was acting out of clarity. And that was much, much scarier. The morning of the wedding felt like a storm pretending to be calm. The house smelled like flowers and coffee, and everyone was smiling too much. The kind of smiles that crack if you stare at them too long. Mom looked beautiful, in that effortless way she always did, but her eyes gave her away. They weren't warm. They were sharp, focused. Dad was in a good mood. He whistled while putting on his tie. Asked Mom if she thought the blue suit looked better than the gray one. She said, "Blue, it hides things better." He laughed, not realizing what she meant. I remember thinking that if guilt had a color, it would have been the blue of that suit. The ceremony was simple. My sister looked radiant, and for a while, I almost forgot what was coming. Mom smiled through every photo, every vow, every fake toast. Dad played the proud husband and father, his hand resting lightly on Mom's back. It made my stomach twist. When the guests moved to the reception hall, everything blurred together. Music, laughter, clinking glasses. I kept glancing at Mom, waiting for a signal, a flicker, anything. But she was composed, greeting people, laughing, even hugging Clara. Yes, Clara was there. Dad had invited her. He told everyone she was a co-worker from marketing, and Mom had insisted she attend since families should be kind to colleagues. When Clara showed up, wearing a pale dress and that smug half-smile, Mom welcomed her like an old friend. They even posed for a photo together. If guilt was an art, my mother was an artist. Dinner began. Dad gave his toast first. All the usual words about love, loyalty, and family. People laughed, clapped. He ended it with a kiss on Mom's cheek. She smiled, slow and steady, like she was tasting poison but refusing to spit it out. Then it was Mom's turn. She stood up with her champagne glass, tapped it gently. "Before I begin," she said, "I want to thank everyone for being here, especially the people who have been part of our family story in ways we never expected." The room went quiet. I felt the air change. Even the music seemed to stop breathing. She continued, her voice steady. "Marriage is built on truth, on loyalty, on trust. And sometimes, when those things are broken, what's left isn't love. It's survival." Dad's smile faltered. He glanced around, confused, like a man realizing too late that the fire is already inside the house. Mom lifted her phone and tapped a button. The projector behind her flickered on. Photos, messages, hotel receipts. It all appeared on the giant white screen above the dance floor. The first picture was of Dad and Clara at a restaurant, then a hotel, then another, then the screenshot, "You taste like trouble, Red Heart." Gasps, whispers. Someone dropped a glass. Dad froze, pale as a tablecloth. Clara stood up, face drained of color, whispering, "Oh my God," over and over. Mom didn't look at either of them. She just said, "I wanted everyone to know what love looks like when it rots from the inside." when lies were wedding rings. Then she set the microphone down and walked out. The silence that followed was unbearable. People shifted in their seats, not sure what to do. My sister was crying, the groom trying to comfort her. Dad just stood there, hands shaking, staring at the screen like maybe if he stared long enough, it would all disappear. I followed Mom outside. She was standing near the parking lot, hands trembling slightly as she lit a cigarette, even though she hadn't smoked in years. "Are you okay?" I asked. She exhaled, looked up at the sky. "No," she said quietly. "But he's not either. That's something." I didn't know what to say. I wanted to tell her she'd gone too far, that maybe revenge like that only made the wound deeper. But when I looked at her face, I realized the wound had already become part of her. Inside, chaos unfolded. People started leaving. Clara ran out crying. Dad followed her, begging. My sister yelled at him, "You ruined everything." Guests pretended not to stare. By the time Mom and I got home, it was dark. She went straight to her room, closed the door, and stayed there for hours. I sat on the stairs listening, waiting for the sound of crying, maybe even breaking things. But there was nothing, just silence. When she finally came out, she looked calm again, too calm. She poured herself a glass of water and said, "Tomorrow I'll call the lawyer." The next few days felt like an echo that wouldn't fade. Dad tried to come home once. He stood at the door, suitcase in hand, eyes red, begging Mom to talk. She didn't open it. She just said through the door, "You talked enough, remember?" He left the suitcase there. It sat outside for 2 days before she told me to throw it away. People in town started whispering, of course. They always do. Some pitied Mom. Some said she went too far. But I knew. None of them saw what I saw in that house. None of them knew how long she'd been living with the ghost of a husband who'd already left. A week later, I found Mom sitting in the living room, looking at old photos. There was one of the 4 of us, me, my sister, Mom, and Dad, taken years ago at the beach. We looked perfect. She traced the outline of his face with her finger and said, almost to herself, "I used to think forgiveness was strength, but maybe it's just another kind of weakness." I didn't answer, because part of me agreed. That night, I got a message from Dad. Just one line. "You'll understand when you're older." I stared at it for a long time before deleting it, because I already understood. I understood that love isn't what holds families together. Truth is. And once that truth breaks, nothing can fix it. The next morning, Mom was gone for a few hours. When she came back, she looked lighter, almost peaceful. She didn't tell me where she'd been, but she handed me a folded piece of paper. "Keep this," she said. "You'll need it someday." It was a divorce agreement. Signed. Later that week, as we packed boxes and prepared to leave the house, I asked her if she regretted what she did at the wedding. She paused for a long time before answering. "No," she said, "but I regret not doing it sooner." Then she smiled, small, tired, and honest. And for the first time in months, she looked free. The house felt emptier than ever after Dad left for good. Even the rooms that hadn't changed, the kitchen, the living room, the hallways, felt different, hollow in a way I hadn't noticed before. Mom moved quietly through them, folding laundry, making coffee, tidying up as if she could stitch the house back together one task at a time. But I could see it in her eyes. Nothing would ever be the same. I stopped looking at the emails. At first, I'd open a laptop almost every night, reliving every message, every photo. But eventually, I realized it didn't matter anymore. The damage was done. The truth had been spoken, and nothing could erase it. People in town whispered. Neighbors stared a little too long at Mom when she went for her morning walks. At school, my sister's friends had questions she didn't want to answer, and some even looked at me differently. The wedding story spread faster than I thought it could, like wildfire. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone had a judgment. Mom didn't respond to any of it. She refused phone calls from relatives who wanted to understand or offer advice. I think she knew that no words could fix what had been broken, and no amount of explanation would satisfy anyone. She only looked forward, one step at a time, with a quiet determination I didn't fully understand. Dad tried to reach out. He left messages on Mom's voicemail. He sent texts to my phone. I ignored them all. Part of me wanted to see him grovel, to hear an apology, even if it came too late. But mostly I wanted him gone. The presence he left behind, the absence he had created, was enough to fill every room. I sometimes wondered if he even realized the consequences of his actions, if he thought about what he'd done, or if he was already trying to rewrite the story in his mind so that he could sleep at night. My sister was the hardest to watch. She drifted between anger and sadness, sometimes lashing out at me, sometimes crying in her room. Her wedding had been supposed to be the happiest day of her life, and instead it had become the moment she first saw how fragile trust could be. I tried to be there for her, silently, offering a shoulder, a hand, a quiet presence. Words felt useless. The betrayal was too deep for anything I could say. Mom and I spent long nights on the porch, smoking tea instead of cigarettes, talking in whispers. Sometimes we didn't speak at all, just sitting there, letting the darkness press against us, letting the reality sink in. It was during those nights that I realized revenge didn't make things better. It just exposed the truth. And truth, as raw as it is heavy. School and life went on, though it felt surreal. I noticed my friends watching me differently. Even teachers seemed to sense the weight I carried, though they didn't ask. Mom focused on work and bills and the daily grind, as if keeping busy could stitch together a world that had torn apart in a single moment. And maybe that was the only way to survive, not by ignoring what happened, but by living in spite of it. There were moments of unexpected clarity. A neighbor brought over pie, just to be kind. My sister laughed at a joke she made up about one of her bridesmaids. Mom smiled at something trivial, while cooking. Small things, simple things, but they reminded me that life hadn't completely ended. There was still a thread of normalcy, thin as it was, connecting us to something beyond anger and betrayal. And yet, the scars remained. Every time I saw a hotel or a text notification, my chest tightened. Every time I saw Dad's car passing by the neighborhood, even empty, my stomach sank. The knowledge of what had been done couldn't be erased. But over time, it became something quieter. Not a scream in the night, but a steady, low hum. A reminder that we survived. Mom never spoke about revenge again. She let the world see what it needed to see and walked away with her dignity intact. I understood then that her victory wasn't in exposing Dad or humiliating Clara. It was in reclaiming her life, her family, and her sense of self. That quiet, controlled power was more frightening than anything she could have shouted or thrown into a room full of guests. Months later, we started moving forward. Mom found a small apartment downtown. My sister transferred to a different school, and I tried to focus on things I could control: homework, friends, small routines. The house we left behind felt like a chapter that had ended. Walls still holding echoes of laughter and lies, but empty the tension that had once filled them. I realized something important in those months. Life is fragile. Trust is fragile. And yet, there's a strange resilience in people who survive betrayal. Mom had taught me that, even in bitterness, even in anger, there's a kind of strength that doesn't demand applause. It doesn't require recognition. It simply exists quietly. By the end of the year, I could walk past the old house without my stomach twisting. I still remembered every detail of the wedding, every email, every message, but they no longer controlled me. They were pieces of a story, harsh, unrelenting, but part of our history. Mom and I sat on the porch one evening, drinking tea. The sun was setting, painting the sky in orange and purple streaks. She looked at me and said, "Sometimes the hardest truths are the ones that save you." I nodded. I didn't say anything else. There was nothing left to say. The fallout had ended, but the lesson lingered. Life could still be beautiful. Just different. Just cautious. Just real. And that was enough. The first few weeks in the new apartment were quiet. Too quiet. I could hear my own thoughts echoing off the walls, bouncing between memories I wasn't sure I wanted to remember. Mom spent most mornings at work, and evenings preparing dinner like clockwork. My sister kept her room, headphones in, music loud enough to drown out the past. I wandered the small space, unpacking boxes that seemed heavier than they should be, each one carrying traces of life that had ended in betrayal and silence. I had expected anger. I had expected tears. I had expected chaos. But instead, there was a strange, still feeling, a careful, fragile kind of calm. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was something that could grow. Mom changed slowly, not outwardly. She still wore the same careful, composed face, but the way she carried herself shifted. She laughed more easily now, though quietly, almost like she was testing the sound. She didn't speak about Dad or the wedding, and I never asked. I didn't need to. The story was out there, in the open, and the weight had left her shoulders. One night, she called my sister and me into the living room. She had bought a board game, the kind we used to play when Dad was still around, before everything had shattered. I thought we could try something different, she said. Her smile was soft but real. We played in silence at first. My sister rolled her eyes when she lost. I laughed awkwardly when I cheated. Mom led us, even though I could tell she had plans of her own. Subtle lessons in patience, in control, in noticing the small victories life offered. It felt strange to smile without guilt, to laugh without apology. But somehow it was allowed now. School became easier, too. Not because people forgot the wedding story, or because gossip ever truly dies, but because I stopped caring about what they thought. I focused on classes, friends, and small achievements. Every time I learned something new, finished a project, or helped someone without thinking about recognition, it felt like reclaiming a part of my life that Dad had tried to overshadow. And at home, life settled into a rhythm. Mom and my sister, and I didn't need to speak about the past to feel its influence. We carried it quietly, like a scar that doesn't hurt anymore, but reminds you where you've been. It made us cautious, yes, but also resilient. Months passed. The first Christmas in the apartment was strange. No Dad, no pretense. Just Mom, my sister, and me. We baked cookies, decorated the tree, and played music too loud. Mom let us burn a few of the cookies. It's the imperfection that counts, she said, smiling. And for the first time in months, I believed her. There were nights when I still thought about Dad. His texts, his laughter, his absence. But I no longer wished for confrontation. The anger had softened into understanding, or at least acceptance. Some people are incapable of change. Some stories end in heartbreak. And some families survive not because of forgiveness, but because they refuse to be defined by betrayal. Mom became quieter, more reflective. She started volunteering at a local community center, helping women who had experienced hardship. I sometimes went with her, watching as she shared her strength without boasting, giving advice without anger. She was building something bigger than revenge. She was building purpose. I learned from her example. I learned that strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet act of moving forward. Sometimes it's a decision to live fully, even when life has shown you its darkest side. By the summer, the apartment felt like home. My sister laughed more. I felt lighter. Mom smiled more easily. The weight of Dad's betrayal still lingered, yes, but it didn't rule us anymore. We were learning to navigate a world where trust would be broken, yet resilience could be rebuilt. I realized something important. The ending wasn't perfect. It wasn't a fairy tale. Dad didn't pay for everything. Clara didn't vanish completely. Life didn't magically make our pain disappear. But we were alive. We were together. And we had reclaimed ourselves. Sometimes I walk past the old house. The paint is faded. The garden overgrown. I don't miss it. I don't mourn it. That house belongs to a chapter that is over. Mom, my sister, and I, we belong to what comes next. One evening, Mom said quietly while looking out the window, "Some things you can't control. Some people you can't change. But you can always choose how to live after." I nodded. For the first time, I felt it, the truth in her words. A bitter truth, yes, but one that could carry us forward. We didn't know what the future held. We didn't pretend to. But for the first time in a long time, we felt ready. And that was enough.